Deep inside Alaska's Tracy Arm fjord, at 5:30 in the morning on August 10, 2025, a mountainside gave way. More than 64 million cubic meters of rock, roughly 2.26 billion cubic feet, sheared off the slope near South Sawyer Glacier and dropped straight into the water below. What happened in the next 90 seconds produced a wave that climbed 481 meters, 1,578 feet, up the opposite wall of the fjord, making it the second largest tsunami ever recorded on Earth. 20 cruise ships were scheduled to sail through that exact channel later that same day. The only reason none of them were caught in it comes down to a single number: the time on the clock. Your instinct, if you've ever watched footage of a tsunami, is probably that the danger lives in the open ocean, generated by a distant earthquake, radiating outward for hours before it reaches anyone. That instinct is correct most of the time. Earthquake tsunamis announce themselves early, they travel across entire ocean basins, and by the time they arrive, ships and coastal towns have often had hours of warning. Tracy Arm did not work that way. There was no earthquake. There was no distant epicenter. The wave was born and finished doing its worst damage inside a single narrow inlet in under 2 minutes, which means the warning window that usually protects people from these events simply did not exist here. The mechanism starts with the glacier itself. South Sawyer Glacier, like most of the glaciers lining Alaska's coastal fjords, has been thinning and retreating for decades. Between 1985 and 2020, glacier-covered area across Alaska shrank by roughly 13%. Think of a glacier not just as a river of ice, but as a support structure, the way scaffolding holds up the outer wall of a building under construction. For thousands of years, that ice pressed against the rock walls of the fjord, buttressing slopes that gravity alone would never have allowed to stand. As the ice thins and pulls back, the scaffolding comes down piece by piece, and the rock behind it, saturated with meltwater and weakened by decades of freeze-thaw cycling, is left holding weight it was never built to carry alone. That's the setup. The compounding factor is geometry, and it's the reason a rock slide in a fjord is far more dangerous than the same rock slide happening on an open coastline. Tracy Arm is narrow and steep-walled, more like a bathtub than a swimming pool. When 64 million cubic meters of rock hits water in a confined channel like that, the displaced water has nowhere to spread out and dissipate. In open water, wave energy fans outward in every direction and loses height fast. In a fjord, the walls trap that energy and funnel it upward instead, which is exactly why a landslide-generated wave can dwarf even a major earthquake tsunami in vertical reach, despite affecting a much smaller area. Here are the numbers researchers have reconstructed. The initial wave came off the slide as a roughly 100-meter breaking wave, traveling faster than 70 meters per second, before slamming into the far wall of the fjord and running up to that 481-meter mark. But the uncertainty in an event like this isn't really about the peak number. It's about how wildly the impact varied within a few miles. A 65-foot tour boat called the David B., anchored in the neighboring Endicott Arm, reported what its captain described as a crazy 5 to 10-foot surge with barely any warning. Meanwhile, a small cruise ship nearby, the National Geographic Venture, logged only minor effects from the same event. Two vessels, a few miles apart, experienced almost entirely different versions of the same wave, and that kind of hyper-local unpredictability is the honest reality of confined water tsunamis. This is not a one-off. In 1958, an earthquake near Lituya Bay, also in southeast Alaska, triggered a landslide that produced a 1,720-foot wave, still the tallest tsunami ever documented, and remarkably, only killed 5 people because the timing again fell in the crew's favor. In 2015, a slope failure at Tan Fjord, also in Alaska, generated a wave that reached roughly 193 meters, about 633 feet, stripping forest off the surrounding mountainsides, much the way Tracy Arm did a decade later. And in 2017, a landslide into Kirat Fjord in Greenland sent a wave into the village of Nuugaatsiaq that destroyed homes and killed 4 people. A sobering reminder that when the timing does not fall in a community's favor, the outcome looks very different from Alaska's recent near miss. The pattern connecting all three events is the same: retreating ice, destabilized rock, and a confined body of water waiting to amplify whatever falls into it. The honest range of outcomes here matters more than the headline number. In the mild scenario, future slope failures in these fjords produce localized surges of a few feet, felt mainly by boats anchored close to the slide zone, similar to what the David B. experienced. In the severe scenario, a larger or more suddenly triggered collapse produces a wave capable of the kind of multi-hundred-foot run-up seen at Tracy Arm or Lituya Bay, with the greatest risk concentrated in narrow inlets close to actively retreating glaciers, places like Barry Arm near Prince William Sound, which researchers have flagged as carrying similar warning signs to Tracy Arm before its collapse. Wider, more open stretches of coastline nearby are far less likely to see the same intensity, because the fjord geometry that amplifies these waves simply isn't present there. What forecasters and geologists genuinely cannot tell you is which specific slope fails next, or on what exact date, or how tall the resulting wave will be. Slope monitoring can track deformation rates and meltwater buildup, but predicting the precise moment a weakened rock face finally gives way remains far beyond current capability. What scientists can responsibly flag is the broader pattern which fjords sit beneath actively retreating glaciers, which slopes are showing measurable movement, and which of those slopes sit above heavily trafficked tour routes. That's the difference between false precision and honest risk communication, and it's why agencies like the Alaska Division of Geological and Geophysical Surveys have been pushing for expanded monitoring rather than specific predictions. It's worth being clear-eyed about where climate change fits into this story, because the connection is real, but it isn't a simple straight line. Researchers studying the Tracy Arm event have directly tied the accelerating retreat of Alaska's glaciers to warming temperatures, and that retreat is what exposed and destabilized the slope that eventually failed. What remains an active area of research is exactly how much any single event's timing or scale was shaped by warming versus the normal, ongoing process of glacial retreat that's been happening in some form since the last ice age. Scientists are not claiming that climate change caused this specific slide on this specific day. They're documenting that a warming climate is measurably increasing the number of slopes vulnerable to this kind of failure across Alaska's coastal fjords. If you're planning to travel through or anchor in one of Alaska's glacial fjords, there are specific things worth doing. Keep any available marine weather and hazard alerts active on your phone or vessel radio, since agencies now issue advisories when slope monitoring detects unusual movement near tour routes. Avoid anchoring directly beneath steep, freshly exposed rock faces close to a retreating glacier terminus, since those are the slopes most likely to still be adjusting after losing their ice support. If you're on a tour boat and the crew mentions recent slope activity in the area, treat route changes as a genuine safety measure rather than an inconvenience, because the lead time on these events, as Tracy Arm showed, can be measured in seconds rather than hours. If you're near the water when a slide happens, moving to open water rather than staying close to the fjord walls reduces your exposure to the concentrated run-up that narrow channels produce. And if you live or work along Alaska's southeast coast, staying aware of which nearby glaciers have been flagged for active monitoring, Barry Arm being the most discussed example, gives you a realistic sense of where this kind of event is considered more likely to happen again. The wave that hit Tracy Arm has already receded, the fjord has already been reshaped, and the immediate crisis is over. But the mechanism that produced it hasn't gone anywhere. The glacier is still retreating. The rock it used to support is still adjusting to holding its own weight for the first time in centuries. The end of one event doesn't mean the danger has passed. It means the danger has moved back into the mountain, waiting on a timeline nobody can fully predict yet. If you want to catch the next pattern like this before it becomes a headline, that's exactly what this channel tracks, so stick around and subscribe. The ice recedes quietly, but it never forgets what it was holding up.